Welcome to tonight's study, my friends, and those of you that will be watching on the video. Before we get into God's Word, I've just got on my heart tonight to pray for a couple of people in the church, and so that reminds me to stop and let's go to the Lord. Most wonderful and gracious Heavenly Father, as we have come to this space again, sacred and holy because of you, Lord, our task here tonight is to take your holy word, find out what it is that you would have us to know about you, about your story, about our story. God, we just ask for an outpouring of the Holy Spirit to that end, Lord, that you would touch our minds so that we could understand the word given to us, and Lord, touch our hearts so that it would find good fertile soil to grow in. And God, just a special word of prayer tonight for two of our members. You know Miss Paula and the struggles she's had this week, and God, her physical as well as her mental problems, and we just ask that you touch her in both ways, that you would bring her peace and comfort. And also, Lord, a call that I just got a few minutes ago, you know that, for Becky Kirkland, and Lord, her medical issues, that you would touch her body, that you would heal her, whether it be through a divine healing touch or through the hands of your earthly servants that you've already equipped. And God, we lift both of those up to you in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. And for those of you who don't know, Becky had to go to the hospital last night. She got home about 7 o'clock this morning, having a little bit of heart issues. And Sadie called me and said she's just really not feeling good. She's going back to her cardiologist tomorrow to see if they can get some relief for you, some answers. So we'll just keep her, as well as Paula, who had a really rough week. Some bad things going on in her life that she's now got a hold on, but needs to kind of wrap her mind around. So we'll lift them up in prayer as we go forward. All right, folks. Man, we had a great week, great study last week. I'm talking, we had friendships, we had betrayal, we had attempted murder. Isn't the story of the Bible great? Especially the Old Testament. Man, this is a great story. Well, tonight won't disappoint us either. We've got a lot of great stuff. So when we closed up last week, you know that David had almost fallen victim to King Saul on a couple of different occasions. Saul tried to spear him through the heart while he was playing the old lyre for him. Lyre, however we're going to call it. We also saw Jonathan kind of feel out his dad and see kind of where he felt. And he found out in no uncertain terms that his dad Saul wanted to kill David. So Jonathan went, told David, hey, you better get out of town, Dad's looking for you. If he finds you, he's going to kill you. So they have some parting words. Jonathan goes back to town. David hits the road. So David's on the road today in chapter 21. He stops off at this little town called Nob, N-O-B, or it could be Nob. I don't know. I'm just going to say it Nob, and y'all think that I know what I'm talking about. Well, he's by himself, but he needs some provisions. He hit the road, I guess, so fast he didn't have time to stop at the quick stop and get him a cold drink and one of those gas station hot dogs. So he stops and he talks to the priest of the town. Evidently, this is one of the Levite towns. And the priest's name is Ahimelech. And he says, hey, Ahimelech, I need some help. Now, Ahimelech looks at me. He's like, oh, man, David, this is that. He's an important guy. So he starts trembling with fear. He's like, why are you here? He's like, don't worry. I'm on a very special mission from the king. Not exactly true, but he doesn't want to tip his hand. He says, man, I'm on a mission from the king. It was so urgent that I ran off without even having anything to eat. Man, I'm famished. And my men are waiting just outside the city. We need something to eat. We need about 5 loaves of bread if you can spare it. Ahimelech says, you know what? I don't have any regular bread, but I do have some consecrated bread. See, the priest every day had to bake fresh bread and put it was called the bread of presence. It was left in the presence of the Lord. At the end of the day, or the next day, that bread was taken out, new fresh bread was put up there. Well, just like the communion bread that I use on communion Sundays, once I have consecrated those elements and blessed them, that bread becomes special. That's why anybody who wants to take the communion bread, I'll let them have it, but they have to understand the only thing you can do with it, you can either consume it or return it reverently to the earth. You can't throw it in the trash or anything like that. So I don't have a problem with people taking it. Well, that kind of comes from this here, where that bread that was in the presence of the Lord is consecrated special. Not just anybody can eat it. So the priest says, well, you can have it if you and your men are consecrated. He says, please tell me that you've kept yourself from being defiled with women. He said, man, we're out in the battlefield. We haven't seen women in a long time. We're good at it. So, okay, we'll take the bread. He says, you know what else? He said, you guys don't have a spear or a sword or anything hanging around here, do you? He says, I left in such a hurry. The king's mission was so urgent. I left and I didn't even bring my sword with me. The priest says, well, the only weapon we have is Goliath sword. You remember, the one that you cut off his head with over there in the valley, right? He said, oh man, there's no other sword like that. Tell you what, I'll go ahead and take that sword. That'd be a great sword for me to take. Well, kind of right in the middle of the whole show, the author is whispering in our ear and saying, by the way, it wasn't just the priest and David. There was another person hanging around. His name was Doeg, and he was one of King Saul's servants. So immediately our mind goes, aha, we got a rat in the mix. You know, I'm thinking this guy's going to go rat David out. So, so we'll kind of file that away in the back. We're just giving a little quick mention of that. And then there's the story of the Goliath sword. So David takes the sword, takes the bread, and hits the road. He ends up going to a Philistine town called Gath. Now, we remember Gath. We talked about it last week. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. That was one of the towns that the Philistines took the Ark of the Lord to after they stole it from the Israelites, and all the bad things happened. And he said they decided to kick it on down the road. They sent it over to Gaston and said, we don't want it around here. Well, he ends up in Gath. Now, this is not a friendly city because the Philistines and the Israelites are still at war. But David goes there because he has really nowhere else to go. He comes into town, and he's going to ask the king of Gath, King Achish, he's going to ask him for protection. Well, King Achish's servants recognize him, and they start singing a song. And guess what song they sing? Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. This is the same song that started the whole mess and got Saul jealous in the first place, saying, wait a second, why are they giving him more credit than me? Well, they know of David and his exploits, and so David gets scared because he knows if they know who he is, they probably also remember that whole 200 foreskin deal that ended up getting him Saul's daughter as a wife. He says, man, I got to do something to save my skin. Surely this is not going to go well. So what he does is he starts acting crazy. He starts acting insane. He starts slobbering all over the place. The saliva's dripping down his beard. Starts clawing at the door frames, marking up all the door frames. And the king looks at him and he said, man, look at this guy. He's crazy. He looks at his servants and said, am I so short of madmen around here that you got to bring me this crazy guy? And so in that way, he tricked the king into thinking that, you know, he was just an insane guy, and the king didn't kill him or anything, just kind of let him go. But he takes off, and in chapter 22, he's still on the run, and his next stop is this cave, and his family comes to visit while he's in the cave. Eventually, all the people in that area who were in distress, all your in-laws, outlaws, misfits, all these guys kind of coalesce around him and become a de facto army for David. So when David left, chased out of town by King Saul, he left all of his army back behind him, because really it was Saul's army. He was just Saul's commander. So he kind of gets a little ragtag army together, and he goes over to Moab. He ends up in Moab, and he asks the king in Moab to give shelter to his father and mother until he's able to sort things out. He said, can you just look after mom and pa for me for a little while? I'll be back for him when I get all this figured out. He ends up going into a stronghold. Now, I'm not sure if they're talking about like some badlands or a cave or what. But anyway, he's in this place, and God speaks to him. He says, David, I don't want you hanging out down here in Moab. You need to be over in Judah. Get out of here and go over to Judah. So David goes back to the territory of Judah and ends up in the forest of Hereth. Meanwhile, later on in chapter 22, Saul is on a rampage. So he's just going off on his people. He's like, man, who y'all going to follow? Where's your loyalties at? You going to follow me, or are you going to follow David? And he says, what can David do for you that I can't? Why are you guys siding with him when I'm the king and I'm the one with all the power and the authority? He says, and besides, why didn't anybody bother to tell me that David and my son Jonathan were all buddy-buddy and ended up best friends. So he is, he is really on this rampage, kind of putting the blame on everybody else, right? This is your fault, your fault, your fault. Not going to say he's like a politician, but he's kind of like a politician. It's always everybody else's fault, and he's not going to take any blame for it. Well, you remember that guy that was hanging out with the priest when David come and asked for the bread, old Doeg? He just happens to be there. And he pops his head up and he says, hey, is this David, the son of Jesse, you're talking about? So I was like, whoa, is there any other David? He said, I seen that guy. I saw him not too long ago. He says, he came over to over at Nob to Elimelech, and he was asking for some bread and some stuff. Not only that, the priest inquired of the Lord on David's behalf, which we're not given that in the scripture, but obviously it must have happened. He also gave him some provisions and the sword of Goliath. I mean, this guy, this priest, I think he's conspiring against you, King Saul. I mean, he gave David everything he needed to escape. So Saul sends for this priest, and he wants all the men of his family to report with him. So Ahimelech and his family show up, and Saul has some questions for him. He says, first of all, why have you conspired against me, O Ahimelech? What in the world are you talking about, Saul? The priest asked, because up to this point, the priest is in the dark. He took David at his word that he was on a mission for the king. I mean, he had no reason to doubt David. He did everything David asked. And now Saul's questioning, giving him the third degree. He's like, what are you talking about? He says, David is your most trusted servant. Why would I have any reason to believe that he was anything less than forthcoming with me? And besides, all this that you're accusing me of, giving him provisions for an important mission, giving him a weapon, and even inquiring of the Lord. Haven't I done this before? I mean, this is nothing new. It's not like I'm going out of my way and conspiring against you. Well, nothing would placate King Saul, and he tells Elimelech, you are going to die. Not just you, Elimelech, but I'm going to kill your whole family. Saul then turns to his guards because he's not man enough to do the job himself, and he says, hey, strike these priests down over here. The guard's like, oh, those are men of God. I ain't messing with them. I know what happens when we mess around with the men of God. Finally, that little rat fink Doeg sticks his hand up in the air and is like, I'll do it. You want them killed? I'll kill them. And so he, Doeg kills all of them, 85 of them in all. So kills the priest and 84 of his family members. Then he goes down to the town of Nob and puts the whole town, women, children, everything, puts it to the sword. Now one of the sons named Abiathar escaped, got away, ran down, found out where David was hiding, and joined up with David. David says, you know what? The king's trying to kill you. He's trying to kill me too. Guess we're in good company. Why don't you just stick around and stay with me for a while and you'll be safe. So chapter 23, while David is waiting, he hears that one of the nearby towns of Keilah is under attack by the Philistines. So he does what a good man of God does. He inquires of the Lord. He says, God, should I go and attack the Philistines and save that town? God says, I think you should. I think that'd be a good thing. Why don't you go down there and do that? So David tells his ragtag army, hey, we're going to go over here and we're going to fight the Philistines. People are like, I don't know. I've heard about them Philistines. They're some mean and nasty people. I don't think we should do it. So David goes to God again and says, God, should I really go and do this? Are you going to be with us? Will you deliver them into our hands? God says, I will deliver you. Just go and do the job. So they go. They fight the Philistines. They're successful. They save the town. Well, a battle that big is bound to raise a little bit of noise. Word gets back to Saul that David is down in Keilah, and he mobilizes his army to chase him down there and to kill him. Meanwhile, David calls on his brand new priest that just joined up, Abiathar, and he says, bring the holy garment here, because I need to inquire of the Lord again. So Abiathar brings the garment, lays it down. David then inquires of the Lord. He says, will Saul really come down here after me to kill me? God says, afraid so. He's on his way right now. He says, well, am I safe in the town? Or will these townspeople sell me out? Will they turn me over? God's like, well, I think the townspeople are going to turn you over. You might want not to stick around too long. So David and his men pack up and they hit the road and move on, going from place to place. And in doing so, escape from Saul's clutches. He goes down to a place called Horesh. Jonathan, Saul's son and his best friend, goes to David to give him some encouragement. He says, don't be afraid of my father. He's not going to kill you. He said, I already see the handwriting on the wall. You're going to be the king of Israel, and I will be second to you. Now that's saying a lot, because Jonathan is Saul's son, and by the rules of the culture at that time, the kingship would have been passed down from father to son. That was one of the arguments that Saul made against Jonathan being friends with David, saying, look, why would you be friends with him? Because as long as he's alive, he's going to end up with the kingdom. God's going to give the kingdom to him. If you kill him, then I can pass the kingdom from myself down to you. Well, Jonathan acknowledges that David is going to be the rightful king as soon as Saul is deposed. He says, I know it. Heck, even my father knows it. That's probably why he's so mad. Meanwhile, the people of that area, the Ziphites, they go to Saul and say, hey, we know where David's at. How about if we give him up to you? Saul is very appreciative, thanks them, and asks them to go and collect more information on David. Tell us where he's at. Tell us what his daily schedule is, when he comes and when he goes and all that. And I'm going to bring some men down there, take the information you give me, and I will track them down. And so he does. He sends his army down there. Him and his army are chasing David, and they're on this opposite sides of the mountain. Saul's on one side with his army, David's on the other side. They're kind of moving around the mountain. And just about the time Saul's about to catch up to him, a messenger comes and says, King, hey, man, I got some bad news. The Philistines, they're raiding. Man, they're taking over our towns. We got to go and get them real quick. Saul's like, man, but I almost got him. Okay, all right. I'll deal with David later. So they peel off their attack, and they go to fight the Philistines. And so David ends up escaping the clutches of, oh man, Saul's right, just about got him right there. And he escapes and goes from there to the strongholds of En-Gedi. Now En-Gedi is a little piece of land right on the western side of the Dead Sea. So that's where he ends up there. In chapter 24, Saul goes down, finishes slapping around the Philistines, and then he gets back to the job at hand. The main mission now is to find David and put an end to his little scrawny self. He hears that he's down in the deserts of En-Gedi, and so he goes down to En-Gedi, and here's what happens when he goes down there. He's in this area, and there's, from my understanding, I've never been there, but there's a lot of caves in that region. Well, King Saul, I guess he had a bad burrito or something the night before, and he's like, y'all, you're just going to have to excuse me. I've got to use one of these caves real quick. So he goes in the cave to relieve himself. I'm telling you, this is good. You can't make this story. This is a good story. Goes into the cave to relieve himself. Well, who should be hiding in the cave but David and his men? David and his men are way back in the dark in the cave, and all of a sudden, here comes the king just strolling in to do his business. And the man's like, David, look who it is. It's a guy. God has delivered him into your hand. Now, I can only imagine this cave must have had very poor acoustics if a guy's going to go in there to do his business and people are back there going, and he didn't hear him. But he didn't hear him. And they're like, man, David, you need to go get him. You kill him while he's squatting right there and he won't even know what hit him. I started dying, cracking up.
He was the king on the throne.
He was king on the throne.
Literally pants down.
Pants down. Well, what David does, David sneaks up to him and takes a corner of his hair. If you can imagine the king's robes just kind of flowing out. He kind of fluffed them out where he can kind of get all situated. David sneaks up, takes his knife, and cuts a corner off his robe. Kind of sneaks on back into the background. And of course, you know, what'd you do that for? You should have just shamed him while you had a chance and been done with it. And so he kind of rebukes him. He gets a guilty conscience, and he orders his men not to attack Saul. He says, look, God forbid that I should do anything against my master, because until God deposes that man, he is the rightly appointed king of Israel. And who am I to lay a hand on him? He is the anointed one of the Lord. Anointed meaning the chosen one, right? As soon so Saul finishes business, doesn't know any of this is happening. Stands up, feel better. Heads on out of the cave. David comes running out of the cave after he gets out and says, Saul, Saul, my lord the king. And Saul's like, is that you, David? He's like, yeah. Why are you chasing me? Why do you listen to others when they say I want to kill you? I don't want to kill you, and I got proof. You were just in this cave, right? Saul's like, yeah, how did you know that? He holds up the little piece of his robe. He says, see this? This is how close I was to you. I could have killed you while you were right there doing your business, and I let you live. That is proof that I do not harbor any ill intent against you. I am innocent of what you're accusing me of. May the Lord judge between us. Well, Saul has a change of heart, and he calls out, he said, is that your voice, David, my son? So he calls David his son, a deep term of endearment. And it says Saul wept aloud because he knew in his heart that he was pursuing an innocent man because of his own jealousy and his own desire for power. He says, David, you're more righteous than I am. You have treated me well, and I have treated you badly. May the Lord reward you for how you have treated me today. And then he repeats what Jonathan's already told him. He says, I know you're going to be king one day, and that God's going to establish your kingdom. So basically, he's repented. He's had a change of heart. He says, the only thing I ask is when you become king, please do not kill off my descendants or wipe out my family name. He said, just do that for me, and I'd be appreciative. David gives his oath to Saul, and they part ways with an uneasy truce. I'm not going to say they were friends, but there was an uneasy truce. Saul returns home, and David goes up to the stronghold. Chapter 25. With this tenuous peace treaty between them, David's not looking over his shoulder anymore. Saul's not trying to kill him, at least for now. We get the story now. Samuel, the prophet, who this book is named after. We were told a long time ago that he was an old man and he was, getting ready to die. When he finally dies, Israel assembles and mourns for him. He's buried. David obviously was there and moves on after that. Now David goes to this place, and there's a wealthy man there. Well, let's back up. So David is kind of just hanging out in a holding pattern. This place where he's staying, evidently it's a meadow where you could graze your sheep and everything. And there was this wealthy man that had a flock of sheep up there, had shepherds and everything. Well, David and his men kind of looked out for him, made sure nothing bad happened, kind of formed a little kind of hedge of protection around him. Now, when it came time to shear the sheep and to kind of harvest everything, David sent messengers to this wealthy man, sent some people to talk to him, and his name was Nabal, and he was a surly, mean, greedy, nasty man, just surly kind of guy. Now he had a wife whose name was Abigail. Now she, on the other hand, is a contrast to her husband. She was intelligent, she was beautiful, she was wise. The messengers go and talk with Nabal and say, hey, look. And honestly, if you read this story through, it almost looks like a mafia shakedown to start with. It's like, hey, it'd be a shame if something had happened to your shepherds up there. The whole time we were there, nothing had happened to your shepherds, huh? What do you say we settle that account? We took good care of you. How about a little kickback here? That's kind of what it sounds like, but in reality, David needs some supplies, and he's just saying, hey, we did our best. We didn't molest your people up there. We actually looked out for them. Nothing that you had up there went missing on our watch. We made sure nothing bad happened. It's shearing time. It's festival time. Perhaps you could spare a dime, brother. Just a little bit to help out with the cause. Now, Nabal isn't in a very given mood. He's a greedy guy. He says, who is this David? There's so many servants that are escaping from their masters and just running to and fro. How do I know that he's just not one of those guys? He said, I don't know this David. He ain't getting nothing from me. I ain't giving him nothing. The messengers go back to David, tell him the story of everything Nabal said, and boy, David is hot. He said, that is the thanks we get for all the protection we've given him. He said, as surely as the Lord lives, by this time tomorrow, neither Nabal nor any of his male family members will be alive. I'll kill every last one of them. So he heads towards Nabal's to carry out this, to take vengeance for being treated poorly. Somebody goes to Nabal's wife Abigail and says, you know, some guys just came and talked to your husband, and he answered him very harshly. And you know your husband's kind of a fool. He's a jerk. I don't see this going well. You might want to see if you can fix this. So Abigail's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that old knucklehead's at it again. I guess I'm going to have to go. She doesn't go to David empty-handed. She puts together a bunch of supplies. She takes some figs, raisins, I think bread, flour, all these things that David would have needed, puts them on donkeys, and she goes out there and meets up with him. She gives him the gifts. She asks him very, very nicely to consider the fact that her husband's a fool, but that she's a little bit, a little bit wiser. Here's the things you need. Please, let's not have any trouble here between us. David's anger subsides. He says, you know what, you're a wise woman. You're very lucky that you came out here to see me, because I'd already made an oath that I was going to come and kill every one of your male family members. But I think I'm going to let my anger turn aside this time. Meanwhile, Abigail goes back, tells her husband what she has done. It says his heart fails him, and he became stiff as a stone. So in other words, I'm thinking he had a heart attack, right? And became incapacitated. 10 days later, the Lord strikes him dead. So now, Abigail's a widow. David gets word of it. He praises God because God has carried out the vengeance that he was going to carry out. And then he gets to remember, and he's like, wait a second. That lady who brought all that stuff, that was his wife. Now, she's not married anymore because he's dead. And she was kind of pretty. She was kind of wise. She was smart. Huh. Hey guys, why don't you go back and see if she needs a husband? Now, he's already got two wives, technically. He's got Michal, which is Saul's daughter, that he had to abandon when Saul was trying to kill him. So he's got that wife. He's already taken another wife. I'm trying to see, where is... let's see. There's a whole...
From chapter 43.
It could have been chapter...
not chapter 43, verse 43 in chapter 25.
There you go, yeah, verse 12, yeah. So he had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel. So he had two wives, but he takes on Abigail. And I don't think it was out of... I think it was out of a sense of duty for her, because although it was Nabal's own doing that he ended up getting struck dead by the Lord, David probably feels a little bit of remorse for that. What's that?
He felt responsible.
Felt responsible and was going to do the right thing. So it wasn't pride or anything like, I'm going to take his wife. But he offered, she accepted, and she becomes his wife. And so now he's got 3 wives. Chapter 26. Well, it was a nice peace treaty while it lasted. Saul's backed up to his old tricks again. He takes up after David again. This time he's after him with 3,000 men. They chase after him and end up making camp.
What started this fight up?
I have no idea. It doesn't tell us. I mean, it just goes from the story of him taking Abigail, Abigail, Nabal, and all that, and then just bam.
But they don't say anything about it.
Well, the Ziphites go to Saul. That's how 26 starts. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding on the hill of Hakilah, which faces Jeshimon?" So Saul went down there with his 3,000 troops. So it's not like they said, "Hey, David's plotting against you again," or "Man, David said your mama, your mama's so fat."
Stirring up the old.
Well, they just went and said, "Hey, David's down here." Now, if the peace treaty was still holding, like, "Oh, okay, well that's good. Nice to know where he's at." But there had to be something.
Yeah.
whether the Lord angered him, put that evil spirit on him again, or maybe he just started festering on it. Maybe somebody stirred pot. Don't know, but Saul's after him again. He goes down, his 3,000 men, they make camp next to this road. David looks down and he sees this, I think that's Saul laying right there, right in the middle of the camp sleeping. Yep, that's Saul. He says, I think that's his armor bearer, Abner, sleeping right next to him. He says, hey, who wants to go on a little excursion with me? I think we're going to go down to camp. David's assistant, let's see, was it Abiathar? No, Abishai. Abishai says, I'll go down there with you. And so David and Abishai sneak down to the camp. Now usually, if you're out in battle, and I know, Dickie, things haven't changed so much from that time to like when you were in, you wouldn't leave your camp undefended at night, right? Somebody had to stay up at night and keep guard.
Yep.
Well, guess what? Nobody's keeping guard. The whole camp is asleep. It's not because of a dereliction of duty. It says the Lord had put them all into a deep sleep. So they sneak up to the edge of camp, and there's Saul right there, snoring. Abner next to him. And Saul's spear is stuck in the ground right next to his head. Abiathar says, man, what good fortune we got here. Kind of like back in the cave. He's like, the Lord has delivered him into our hands. Man, let's do this thing. He said, David, don't even bother yourself with him. Let me do it for you. He says, let me strike him with the spear. I promise it ain't going to take me 2 times. I'll get him the first time. Once again, David refuses. He says, not going to put a hand on him because that man is anointed by God. He says, tell you what, go over there and take that spear. And oh, by the way, grab that water jug that's next to him too. So he takes his spear and his water jug. What do you think he's going to do with it? Well, he takes him back a little ways away, a good safe distance away, climbs up on top of this hill. He doesn't even bother calling King Saul. He calls Abner out. He's like, Abner, you no good son of a gun, wake up down there. Abner's like, what? Why are you calling down here to the king? He's like, I'm not talking to the king, I'm talking to you. He says, who in the heck do you think you are that you didn't guard your master? Letting people just sneak in a camp. Any old person could come in and kill the king. What have you got to say for yourself? Saul hears this. I'm sure Abner's face drained when he looks around, sees the spear and the water jug gone, and he's like, oh, man, king's going to have my hide for this one. Meanwhile, Saul calls out. He's like, is that you, David, my son? He's like, yeah, it's me. So why are you still chasing me? I thought we had us a peace truce going on here. He says, God sent you, or was it man? If it's God, I'll offer an offering. But if it's people, let them be cursed, because they're stirring you up against me, and there's nothing I'm doing that deserves this. He says, who are you even looking for? I'm just a flea. I'm just a nobody. Why are you chasing after me? Saul, once again, is convicted in his heart. He admits his sin and calls David to him. He's like, come on down to me. He says, I promise I won't try to harm you again. So David's like, oh, no. Now, I know all your dirty tricks. I'm not coming over there. But I tell you what, send somebody over here for your spear and your water jug, and you can have them back. I spared your life. May God spare mine and deliver me from your wrath. And Saul then blesses David, gives him blessed, say, David, be blessed. Man, I know you're just going to do some great things in your life. We think that things are over there. David, he's not so sure. So once again, he goes back to the Philistines, back to that town of Gath, to King Achish. This time he doesn't pretend to be insane. He just goes and he says, look, he says, I'll be honest with you. Saul's trying to kill me. I need a place to hang out. I know we haven't been very friendly in the past, but I'm a guy that you can count on. I'll be here for you through thick and thin. So he, he befriends the king's son, and he gets him to give him a town in called, I think it was Gilgal. Let's see, where am I? Chapter 27. Ziklag, that's it, Ziklag. So he gives him the town of Ziklag, and so he goes and lives in Ziklag. he uses this town as a raiding base, and so he would launch raids out of Ziklag, and he was actually raiding Philistine towns. And when he'd go into these towns, he'd kill everybody. That way there were no witnesses. And when he'd come back to Ziklag, King Achish would say, "Hey, what you been up to today, David? Where you been?" He's like, "Oh man, we went down to Judah, down to the Negev, raiding. Yeah, we've been giving those Israelites heck down there, boy. We just tearing them up." And every day it goes on like this, and King Achish is like, "Man, this guy is so obnoxious that he's going down and attacking his own people. Surely he'll always remain loyal to me." He was in with the Philistines a little over a year. And in chapter 28, the Philistines gather up their forces and they get ready to go to war against the Israelites. At that point, King Achish comes to David. He says, "Now, I know you're an Israelite, but you're one of us now. And you know when we go to war, you got to fight with us against your own people, right?" David's like, "Hey man, I'm always down for a good fight. I'm with you, King. I'm your guy." And so Achish thinks so much of David, he makes him his own personal bodyguard, and he claims, "You're my bodyguard for life. You're my guy." I mean, that's how much trust I have in him. Meanwhile, we'll jump over and see what Saul's doing on the other side of this arrangement. Saul, he tries to inquire of the Lord. He tries all the things he knows of. He prays to the Lord. God doesn't answer him. He asks for dreams. God doesn't answer him. He uses the Urim, which is, scholars believe it was like casting lots or rolling die to try to divine what God's thinking is. He wasn't getting an answer to that. Prophets weren't even getting a word from God on Saul's behalf. And so he decides to go and inquire of a medium. So he goes down to this place called Endor, seeks out this medium, and says, "Hey, I need some information." Well, the medium thinks it's a trap. She goes, "Hold on now, Well, he's in disguise, so she doesn't know it's him, but she goes, "No, you know what King Saul has said, no mediums allowed." He said, "Man, he'll kill any of us if he finds divining spirits." So she initially refuses, thinks it's a trap. Saul assures her that she will not be punished. "Look, I ain't going to tell nobody. I just need some information." She goes, "Well, who do you want to talk to?" He says, "I need you to call back Samuel." Now, Samuel, his grave probably hadn't even sunk in yet. I mean, it's still fresh. He's fresh in the grave. So she calls out for Samuel, and Samuel comes back from the dead. And when she sees him, she screams out. Now, she doesn't know who Samuel is, presumably, but she sees who it is, and immediately she understands that this guy who's come to her is King Saul. She thinks she's a dead woman. He's like, "What do you see? What do you see?" She goes, "I see spirits." Actually, the Hebrew word is gods, Elohim, coming up out of the ground. And he says, "Well, what does it look like?" "Well, he's got a robe on, and got a beard. That's Samuel. That's who I need to talk to." And so he says, let's see. Oh, here we are. So Samuel, the first thing he says is not, "Hey Saul, how's it going? How you been?" He says, "Why in the heck have you called me back here? Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul's like, "Man, I'm sorry, Samuel. I wouldn't have done it, but I got no other alternative. You see, God won't answer me. I've asked him for dreams. I prayed to him, tried casting lots. I've done all this stuff. I need you, Samuel, to tell me what to do." And he says, "Why are you bothering me? I've already told you that the Lord has become your enemy. Everything that I prophesied to you is happening. There's nothing I can do. You're not going to change it. God has declared it. That's just the way it is." Now, I guess Samuel was really ticked off for being disturbed from his eternal sleep, because now he lays the smack down on Saul. He says, "Look, God has torn the kingdom away from you, given to David. You already know that, but let me tell you something you don't know. You and Israel will fall to the Philistines. I know that's what you're asking about. You guys are getting ready to go to battle. Well, you're gonna fall to the Philistines. Tomorrow, you and your sons are going to be with me. In other words, you're going to die tomorrow." Well, imagine Saul. Boy, he locks up with fear, falls down. Not only fear, but he's hungry because he hadn't eaten all day. Samuel goes back his way. Saul is scared, witless because of what he has just heard. The medium tries to take care of Saul. He's like, man, I risked my life to obey you. Now listen to me, Saul. Take some food. Let me give you some food so you have the strength to get the heck out of here and leave me alone. Saul refuses, but his men and the woman, they keep after him to get him to change his mind. So she butchers a fatted calf, makes some bread, and feeds Saul and his men, and then they hit the road. So, in chapter 29, back to the Philistines, they're getting ready for battle. They gather up. David and his men are marching at the rear of this column of troops heading out. Now, you're King Achish. You know you and David are tight, right? But all your commanders around you, they don't know that. All they know is, man, we're going to go fight the Israelites, but yet we got Israelites back here? I don't think this is a good idea, King. He's like, oh, no, man. Me and David are tight. We're good. We're good. And commander's like, I don't think so. Isn't this one of Saul's best officers? Yeah, he's on the outs with him right now, but what better way to get back in Saul's good graces than by starting to chop off our heads when we're unsuspecting? No, King, I don't like this one bit. We think you ought to send him back. Achish says, look, the guy's been with us for a year. He's been faithful for over a year, hadn't he? Little do they know that he's been going and raiding these Philistine towns and killing everybody, so there's no witnesses. The commanders insist, like, King, look, we're not going to do this if David goes. You got to send him back home. Surely he'll turn on us during the battle. And by the way, you remember that song? Isn't this the song they sing about David? Back to Saul is slain his thousands, David is tens of thousands. And Achish's like, well, I still think he's all right, but I mean, if it's going to be that big of a problem, we'll send him home. So Achish goes to David and says, you know, David, if it was up to me, I'd let you hang out with us. But, you know, my commanders, well, they're just not so hot on the idea. David's like, well, what have I done? Why can't I go and fight your enemies for you? He said, man, you and me, we've been solid here, but I got to go with my commanders on this one, because if you don't leave, they're not going to fight. I'm just going to have to send you back home. So David heads back early the next morning. David goes back in chapter 30 to his town of Ziklag, and when he gets there, he finds out that the Amalekites have come calling while he was gone. The Amalekites have come and they've captured all the women and children. Now, they didn't kill any of the women and children, but they've taken all the women and children of this town as captives, as well as all the possessions of the Israelites, and they took off. They destroyed the rest of the city, but they couldn't carry off by fire. And in addition to, along with all the women and children, were David's two wives. Now, how do you think that makes David feel? He's upset. Now, the men of the town, it says they weep until they can't cry anymore. Then they start looking around and say, I wonder whose fault this is. David, it was your idea to leave the place unprotected and go fight with the Philistines. This is your fault. They even start talking to stoning the poor guy. And they were bitter in spirit, obviously, because of their wives and children. But David, he found his strength in the Lord. And he again calls on his old buddy Abiathar, who has the religious, the ephod, the religious outerwear. He says, bring that ephod here. I need to do some inquiring real quick. I need to talk to God. So Abiathar brings the ephod, and he kind of kneels down and he says, God, should I pursue that raiding party? And if I pursue him, will I be able to overtake him? God says, hit the road. Pursue him. I promise you, you're going to overtake him. So David and the 600 men, they take off after the Amalekites. They get to a certain point, and of the 600, about 200 of them, they're just too tired to go on. I'm guessing that they hadn't eaten very much when they were marching with the Philistines. They come back, ain't ate a thing because they were mourning because their town was ransacked, and then they just take off and eat. Two of them are like, David, we can't go any on. I tell you what, we can't go further. Leave the supplies here. We'll guard the supplies. You take the fresh men and you go on and get them. So the 200 stay behind. The other 400 go on. Along the way, they find this Egyptian who is just famished. They give him some food and water to revive him. And David says, who do you belong to? Where do you come from? The guy's like, well, I'm an Egyptian, but I was a slave of the Amalekites. I got sick 3 days ago, and my master just left me to die out here. He says, I was with the party that burned Ziklag. David's like, you know where that raiding party's going? Can you lead us to him? He's like, look, I'll lead you to him, but you got to promise that you will not kill me, nor will you hand me back over to my masters. I'm guessing David agrees because the guy leads him out there. David goes out, finds the raiding party, and sees that they're just partying. Man, they're having a good time. Like, oh man, we got in there, we took everything. Oh man, look at all this stuff. They were partying, they were drunk. David goes in and just starts laying waste to them. Kills all of them except for 400 that escapes on camels. Gets back all the plunder, all the women, all the children. Not a man, or not a boy or a girl was lost. Not a woman was lost. Got back all that plunder. They're heading back home, and they have an interesting encounter on the way home. They run back into those 200 that they left behind. Now those 200, they look like, oh man, look, they got all the stuff back. Well, the 400 that went on and fought, they're like, don't think you're getting any share of this. You didn't want to come fight with us? Well, you were too weak to make the trek. You're not getting any of the plunder. And David's like, I don't think that's the way it should go. He says, I tell you what, everyone gets an equal share. Even those in the rear with the gear are going to get a share, just like the ones that fought on the front line. Let's see. Chapter 31, which will close out this book of 1 Samuel. We now jump over to the battle. David's back at Ziklag now. We're back in the front lines with the Philistines and the Israelites. So the Philistines are giving them a heck of a fight. The Israelites are fleeing. Many of them are falling dead. The Philistines are pursuing after Saul and his sons. And his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua were killed. The archers took a couple of good shots and severely wounded King Saul. Now Saul is laying here, got arrows in his side, knows he's going to die, but he's figuring that a Philistine is going to come and finish him off with a sword. He's like, look, talks to his armor bearer. It's like, hey man, I need you to do me a favor here. Kill me with my sword, or with your sword, so that these uncircumcised people don't kill me. I don't want to be killed at their hand. The armor bearer refused because he was scared. He's like, I can't do it, King, I can't do it. Well, Saul then's like, well, I guess if you want something done around you, you just got to do it yourself. So he takes his own sword, falls on the sword, and ends up committing suicide. Well, the armor bearer sees what's happening. He's like, you know what, I can't go on like this. Falls on his sword, and he dies as well. Meanwhile, Israel flees in terror. The Philistines get over here, see Saul's dead body, the bodies of his sons. The Philistines cut off Saul's head and then hang his body, and I'm not sure, hangs the body of Saul as well as his sons on the city wall at the nearest city. They proclaimed the news throughout the land that the Philistines had defeated the Israelites. The men of Gilead, which was the nearest Israelite town, they hear about the battle. They go down and retrieve the bodies to give them a proper burial. First, they burn the bodies, then they take and bury the bones, and then after that, they fasted for 7 days. That wraps up the book of 1 Samuel. Boy, we even had suicide in this one. Looting, killing, hostage taking, and suicide.
And witches.
And witches. Oh my. Had a little bit of everything in there. So the story, we have progressed from the point where Saul was anointed as the first king, messed up, God decided to tear the kingdom away, actually had David anointed, but we knew, because I already told you ahead of time, David would not become rightful king of Israel until something happened to Saul. Well, that something's happened. Saul is dead. David is poised to become the king. We'll see next week where it's not just going to be as easy as saying, okay, Saul's dead, God said I was king now, worship, follow me. There's a little bit more work to be done, but we'll get there, and David will be established as king. But man, we've come a long way to get where we're at. What are y'all's thoughts about this story? I mean, this is a crazy story, isn't it?
It's interesting to me, the way they keep their word, like, I'll do this, but you have to promise. It's like, that was a very big thing.
It was a very big thing.
I mean, now you say, yeah, I promise, Dick, if you do this, and you say, I'll forget that. You know,
And then you double cross them as soon as you get what you want.
You do it if it's convenient.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's exactly right. But
Yeah.
It seems like this is.
Yeah, you know, I mean, of course, we saw it, well, we've seen it all through the Old Testament, ever from Genesis, but I mean, it was real clear with Jephthah and his daughter, sacrificing his daughter, even though it was a foolish vow. I mean, we see where it's been very inconvenient to keep the vow. Yeah. Miss Diane, what do you think about this crazy story?
I didn't live back then.
Well, I mean, that's a good insight. Yeah, that was a crazy time to be alive back then.
I don't know, it's just as crazy now.
Well, I mean, in a different way, yeah. I mean, we are living in crazy times.
I mean, people take somebody else's life for no purpose or reason now, whereas at least then it was based on, you know, a group or tribe fighting another tribe.
Right.
And now it's just for the fun of doing
Driving down the
it.
road.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm sure they were, I mean, Cain and Abel's a great example of a senseless murder. I mean, that's why one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not commit murder.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a crazy story, but, and it seems foreign to us because we're so far removed from that culture. But it really is, if we can stipulate the fact that the Bible is a unified story that points to Jesus, leads to Jesus, really this story is all about getting the line that would produce the Messiah to a point where they're ready to produce the Christ child. And that meant a lot of purification, for better or worse, whether it be spiritual purification of doing the right thing or completely annihilating everybody that stood in the way of that line of David going forward.
I love the way that at least David has the consideration. He's not going to touch the anointed of God.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's a big thing to that respect.
When that man dropped his pants in that cave, I'd have cut his throat. I really would. I mean, I wouldn't have known what to do other than
He's coming for you.
he's coming. It's him or me, and right then it would be him. Yeah. So yeah, that's a great insight. He had a great amount of, even though God never told him to hold back. And to his followers, it almost looked like this is God saying, this is your chance. God handed it to you. Do something.
Well, it's like Jesus on the cross. Like, he could have come off the cross.
Oh yeah.
But he chose to respect the authority of what God was doing.
And the chain of events that that all meant. I mean, think about what the story would mean to us as Christians if Jesus had rescued himself from the cross, like the high priest taunted him to, like the soldiers taunted him to. Our story wouldn't be near as meaningful because he wouldn't have died, he wouldn't have rose from the grave, and wouldn't still be seated at the right hand of the Father. So, yeah, our stories, at the time, it seems like a crazy way to tell the story, but and I'm not even sure I can wrap my mind around how awesome that story is now, but I mean, I can see how it had to happen that way, but I can also see about 10 other ways that God could have done it in a more straightforward fashion. But thank goodness he's got the answers that I don't. But yeah, and I know we're going to poor Miss Paula.
Well, I mean, you know, a lot of these things explain some of the customs, some of the mindsets, but at the same time, it just seems like God keeps giving them directions and chances. They never listen.
No, they don't. And that's why I remind people, the Israelites were not called because they were special. They were called and then made special because of that call. And even that special, they couldn't quite get it just right. Thank goodness. God's grace and mercy. It's kind of like what I preached on this morning. Even when we lose focus, even when we lose sight of what the mission is, God could cast us aside and say, all right, y'all don't get it. God could have cast James and John aside after they were like, hey, I want that seat and that seat. God's like, that's not how it is. pour that grace and mercy upon us, kind of refocus us and get us back to work.
That's a big story.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you want them in favor with God, so you know what I mean? That's a big story Jesus said. It's not for me to.
Yeah, so, man, that's, you know, those seats are already,
Yeah.
those are season ticket holder seats. I almost thought about saying that today. Those, you know, those are the those are season tickets. You know, you've got to get yours from the scalper. Any other insights before we wrap it up tonight?
Good story. Good story.
It's a great story. I love it. Yeah. I mean, and you guys are on this journey with me, and man, you're a great traveling companions.
It's a lot more lively here than the Tuesday morning. I mean, everybody sat there and just, I mean, they sucked in the story and they got it, but they just, and then again, I guess, you know, they probably heard it 50,000 times before, maybe not the same way.
Yeah, well, definitely not the same way.
You make it visible, you know.
Very much.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's what I'm going for. So I'm glad that I'm hitting the mark there.
And I mean, I can tell, watching, you know, they got it. They're watching.
Oh, yeah, they get it. They're just
A good storyteller, it makes a difference. A good storyteller can make you smell it, feel it.
Yeah.
You could almost smell what was happening in that cave. Some things we don't want to smell. All right, well,
No
friends,
pun intended.
we'll get back together next week. We'll start the book of 2 Samuel, which is where we'll really pick up with the story of David. David comes into his own as the king, and
It has a perfect existence with no problem.
Oh yeah, I mean, he is a man after God's own heart who never makes a mistake. Perfect leader.
He really is bloodthirsty though.
Oh yeah.
I think
Yeah,
so.
hey, King Saul says, I want 100 foreskins. He's like, 100? I'm just warming up. Let me get you 200. So anyways, until next week, I bid you to go forth in peace. Amen.
Good job.
Hey folks, remember to click the subscribe button below and ring the bell to be notified when we post new content. And as always, if today's video touched you in some way, please hit the thumbs up button and leave us a comment. We love to hear how our content impacts your walk with Jesus Christ. Until next time, God bless.